So as you guys probably already know, Call of Duty Warzone is coming out tomorrow. On the 10th, Warzone is out, it is free for everyone to play, it is a Battle Royale, and it is made by Infinity Ward. That's the basic details, and I talked about that earlier in today's earlier video. But I wanted to go a little bit more in depth with the map in this video, because generally when I go and I can get gameplay early for you guys, I try to show you as much as possible, whether that's all of the weapons in multiplayer or kill streaks, but I didn't quite know what to do for this one. But one of the most important things in a Battle Royale is the map. So what I thought I would do is kind of go around and show you every single one of the locations. Now, there were no private matches available, so what I'm getting this from is, first of all, I'm showing you the map, and then I'm going to be going to all of the locations in gameplay with images, and pretty much just using all of the resources I can to give you guys a picture of what the entire map actually looks like. And it's a really big map. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So first of all, here is the entire map of Battle Royale, and it actually doesn't look huge on here, but let me tell you, it plays massive. There's giant buildings and everything in between. The one thing I should mention before we actually dive in further with this map is that one thing that they told us when they were giving us the entire presentation on Warzone is that each individual building has been individually manufactured. In other words, they went in and decided exactly how that building was going to look, where the walls were going to be. In other words, if you go into one house, the next house you're going to go into is going to be different. It's not just a cookie cutter model of a house. And I think that's amazing, and I honestly think that makes the map feel a lot bigger. Now, let's actually dive into those actual locations we can see on the map. Starting up in the north, the first location we're going to look at is Dam. It's the most northern location, and on top of that, it's one of the only snowy locations. So as we drop in here, you can see in the background, there is the dam, and it actually looks relatively similar to the dam from Blackout, but where things actually start to get different is when you go inside the dam. It's actually much smaller than the one from Blackout, but you can see all the turbines and stuff going on in there. Honestly, probably not a great location to land, as there's not a ton of buildings and loot spots here, but it's very secluded. It's up in the top, there's not a lot of buildings around it. The dam is kind of the only thing for a long while. But honestly, I have to say, I think this is one of the cooler locations. One, because it's the only snowy area, and if I'm being honest, I just think it looks kind of beautiful, I'm not gonna lie. After this, up in the northeast, the second location that we got here is Military Base, and once we actually go to look at this one, you're gonna probably recognize it. This one is obviously from a Spec Ops mission, and this location has many more buildings than we saw at the dam, and quite clearly it's a military base. Honestly, there's not too much I can say about this. There is a giant fielded area outside of the military base, so if you're leaving there, you gotta be pretty careful, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. The next location you should be very familiar with. It is called Quarry, and it's based off of Karas River Quarry, the ground war map that's already in Modern Warfare. Now, if you're new to the game, if you're one of the free-to-play players and haven't played this, it's a ground war map. That's pretty much all you need to know. And this is a quarry. There's a ton of loot in this area. There's a lot of big buildings, so you got to be careful. And this is an area that I landed twice, and you really got to pay attention to footsteps, because you can hear them a mile away in this building, because everything people are walking on is metal, and that means you can hear them from a mile away. So this is an area you can land, get a lot of loot, and potentially get a lot of kills. This next location is absolutely one of my favorites. It's called TV Station, and if you've played Call of Duty before, you might happen to know what this location is. It's Broadcast from Call of Duty 4, and unfortunately, I didn't actually go inside the building in my gameplay, but I promise you, inside that building is exactly Broadcast from previous Call of Duty games. Unfortunately, like I said, the only gameplay I have is from on top of the building. And of course, as you can see around the building, there's several other small buildings, and then we're kind of working our way towards the stadium. Speaking of stadium, that's the next location we're going to go to, and unfortunately, again, I don't really have much gameplay here. There was a lot of zones that ended around stadium, but we never actually went there. I don't actually know if you can go in the stadium, but it is one of the larger locations, so I assume you can. But you can definitely see in the gameplay here around the stadium, and it looks exactly like it does in Spec Ops. Going back to something that you're definitely going to be familiar with, we've got Farmland and Lumberyard. Now, I'm grouping these two together because they're relatively similar. They're basically giant farmers' field with a bunch of little farmhouses and barns and stuff like that in that area. It's relatively simple. It's forested. There's farms. There's fields. Really straightforward, and some of the area literally looks identical to Krobnik Farmland from the Ground War map if you've played that. Airport is the next location we're going to go to, and I've heard so many people say that this is Terminal. It's not Terminal. It is the same airport that is in the Spec Ops mission. So there's like a crashed airplane outside, a giant runway. There's also some other aircraft hangars on one side, and then on the other side, it's exactly what you see in the Spec Ops map. Really nothing you haven't seen before. It was literally just taken right out of Spec Ops. And then right underneath that, we have something called Storage Town. Now, this entire area is taken right out of Spec Ops, so you probably have seen this before if you've played Spec Ops. If not, this is basically just a bunch of storage. And this area is honestly a little bit like a maze. You have to run through the whole thing. There's a lot of loot in it, but it's just one story, and you can get lost in it. And there's going to be a lot of gunfights here where you're very confused where the enemy is coming from, but I do definitely think that it is a fun area. Another very familiar area is right beside that. That is, of course, Costco. Nope, sorry, Superstore. And Superstore is relatively self-explanatory. It's a big box store. We've seen it both in Spec Ops and as a multiplayer map. The one that we see here is more along the lines of the Spec Ops version. It doesn't have the exact same lines of sight as the multiplayer version whatsoever. So keep that in mind if you are playing it. Now, slightly underneath that and to the left, we've got Boneyard. Now, this one is really self-explanatory. If you played multiplayer in Modern Warfare, this is the exact same as the Boneyard Ground War map. Part of it is actually Scrapyard from Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, but the majority of it is just a giant boneyard, a lot of downed planes, a few buildings here or there, but more or less just a lot of downed planes. After this, the next area we have is Train Station, and again, this is one that is relatively straightforward. Now, it's interesting because this hasn't been in any Ground War map, so I wouldn't be surprised if we actually ended up seeing this area in a Ground War map in the future. But as far as what we're looking at here, relatively straightforward. You got some train tracks with some trains on it, and then some buildings surrounding it. It is not as big as the train station in Blackout, but it's about, I would say, half the size of that. The next area I want to look at is called Downtown, and this is basically the same as the multiplayer map Tovorsk. It's a lot of really, really big buildings, skyscrapers, 16 stories tall. A lot of people are going to be sitting on roofs here, and I have a feeling that this area is kind of going to be like Tilted Towers from Fortnite, just because, again, there's those really big buildings, a lot of loot in this area. I can predict a lot of people landing here. And on top of that, there's a lot of really small two-story buildings scattered amongst the ground as well, which, again, you can find a lot of loot in those areas. My prediction, this is probably going to be the busiest area on the map. The next location is my personal favorite, and that is Hospital. So I landed here and immediately thought this location was absolutely awesome. It's just on the outside of downtown, so they're still surrounded by giant buildings, but they're a little bit smaller, and the hospital is awesome. Really close corridors, a lot of close quarters action, and you still have the people who are sitting up on the roofs. You can try picking it off and all of that. It's just a really, really cool location, and things like this building didn't really exist in Blackout, so it's not something we've ever seen before in a Call of Duty Battle Royale. Really cool building, probably my personal favorite place to drop. After this, we're going to one of the furthest south points. This is the hills, and honestly, this location kind of reminds me of a state from Blackout. Basically, it's a residential area. You land there, and it's like a suburb, and there's a bunch of houses all on a court in a circular kind of pattern, and they're relatively big houses. It's a pretty good spot to land if you're just going for loot. I could see it being pretty busy, and if there's too many people there, there wouldn't be enough loot. So it's a cool location, and it's very different from everything else on the map. Very, very much so more residential than everything else. Now, just slightly north of that, really not far at all from the hills, is East Promenade and West Promenade. It's kind of like a suburb commerce area. There's gas stations, there's restaurants, and actually one of the restaurants that you see a couple of times throughout this map is actually Burger Town, which is kind of an Easter egg or tip of the hat to Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and 3, which is kind of cool to see return, even though it's in Russia. But this area basically is just a long road with a bunch of middle-sized buildings like restaurants and like gas stations. The next one that you're definitely going to recognize is Port. This is essentially Port of Verdansk, once again from Ground War. It is literally exactly the same. Nothing has changed. Vacant is still a part of it. Nothing is different there, and you're going to recognize it right away once you hop in. Now, what I will say is the surrounding area there is a little bit different. The first thing is actually the next area, which is called Park. Now, unfortunately, this is one of the few areas that I didn't actually go, and the only time I could actually see it on any of my recordings was right when I was dropping in. You could see kind of like this green open area on the other side of the river of Port, and that is what you are looking at here. Sorry, it's not a great image. It appears as though it's going to be a pretty open area, kind of like a city park. And then the final area is called Prison, one of the coolest areas on the map, and this is essentially the gulag. It is not the same gulag that you go into when you get killed and you're trying to respawn. It's not the same area. It looks completely different, but it is a really cool area. Now, unfortunately, the gameplay I have of it, I can't show you until tomorrow. So this is just some footage taken in theater mode outside of Vacant. It looks very similar to this, but way more detailed, and the inside of it honestly kind of looks like a Coliseum. They did a really good job with it, and I will have it in tomorrow's gameplay, so make sure you stay tuned to the channel for that. But ladies and gentlemen, that is all of the locations in Call of Duty Warzone. At this point, I'm curious what you guys are thinking about it. If I'm being honest, I just want to play the game more. I'm really excited for you guys to get your hands on it. So all throughout this week, we're going to have a ton of Warzone videos. So if you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure you do so. Make sure you turn notifications on. If you enjoyed this video, it is really appreciated if you do hit the like button, and let me know down in the comments what you're thinking of Warzone so far. But guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace out.
Listen.